I'm joined today by former Buffalo Bill Arthur Moats to get his perspective on the state of the Bills defense and some of the dynamics for being a player at this point in the season today on Locked On Bills.
You are Locked On Bills, your daily Buffalo Bills podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Bills Mafia? It's Joe Marino, author of Go Bills and Buffalo's Run, also the co-host of the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast, and I'm your host of Locked On Bills. Want to thank you for making Locked On Bills your first listen every day, and a big welcome and shout out to our everydayers. You know who you are. Those of you who never miss a single episode, I appreciate y'all being here very, very much. I'd also like to invite you to subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. I'm joined now by former Buffalo Bill and Pittsburgh Steeler Arthur Moats, and I'm very excited to have this opportunity to discuss the Bills and the defensive outlook with a former player. And look, Arthur is not only a former player, but he's a guy that has gotten into the content creation world, does a lot of YouTube work on the Bills and the Steelers. I'll make sure that we have a link in today's show notes so you can check out Arthur's work on both teams. And Arthur, thanks so much for joining me. Really, really excited to kind of pick your brain on this Bills defense.
No, Joe, man, I appreciate the opportunity, man. I love what you're doing as well, man. So like I said, it's going to be a fun one today.
Appreciate that. Now, listen, I want to start with not necessarily a specific question about the Bills, but something that's always fascinated me about this time of year in the NFL. What's it like? Like, what's the mindset of an NFL player right now during training camp and preseason where you know you've got all these teammates, they're your brothers, but on the other side of things, you're competing for very limited spots. What can you share with us about navigating that competitive environment with people that you care about, but you also want to beat them out?
Man, it is such a weird space that, you live in, so to speak, when you're in training camp. Obviously, it's 90 guys on a roster. And in one sense, we're trying to become close. I want to know about your personal life, who you're married to, children, college, your interests. But then at the same time, I'm trying to take your job. I'm trying to make sure that you don't take my job. I have to validate why I deserve a roster spot, or if I'm a second contract guy, why I should be here versus somebody who might be a cheaper option. And it's just a weird space that we all have to kind of maneuver through. But the one thing that I would say is, with the common goal always being championship, we are on a team. That's kind of how you maneuver through it, so to speak. But it is still one of those things where I always say, man, I have some of my closest friendships because of training camp. But when we think of what me and another person had to do to each other in certain instances, it's just like, man, it's almost like you've forged this bond because of that trauma.
It's interesting how you pointed out the differences between maybe being a young guy and an established guy and how that can be really, really different. Because I mean, you hear players talk all the time, coaches, executives talk about how it is a business, but there's a lot that's baked into that sentence there, right? I'm sure.
Hey, so listen, and that whole business element of it. I mean, me and you, Joe, we could be brothers playing linebacker together, but if you're the cheaper option and we're very, very similar in our play style, they're going to go with you. So I have to make sure that if I'm the guy that's a little bit more paid or the guy that's a little bit older in the room, that I do enough to separate between me and you. And like you said, the guys that do that are able to put together these nicer careers, but it's the reason why the NFL career, average is what it is, because these young guys are coming in and they're just as hungry and just as talented.
Well, 9 years in the league, Arthur, I think you probably figured that out quite well along the way.
I want to ask. Very fortunate, man. Very fortunate.
Well, you're a fun player, man. We'll get to that. I want to ask you about Matt Milano. Obviously, he's going to be out for an extended period of time and potentially the season. And so what is a loss like that from a player's perspective? I mean, we're not talking about just anybody. This is probably the Bills' best defensive player gone for the season. I know coaches, then everyone says next man up, but the next man up's not Matt Milano. How does something like this ripple through the locker room?
Man, when you lose a all pro caliber, Pro Bowl caliber, best player on your defense caliber player, everybody feels the ripple effect of that. No matter how confident you are in the depth, no matter how confident you are in the other playmakers, those guys aren't Matt. If they were, they would be compensated like Matt and they would produce like Matt. I mean, think about Matt. Matt had a chance to go from being a sidekick with Tremaine to Tremaine leaving. And then we saw Matt ascend to a whole nother level. And it was like, man, this dude is really, one of the better linebackers in the NFL as a whole. So it's a lot that comes with that. But at the same time, we think of last year, he missed time. We know after that Jaguars game in London, he was gone. So we had to see Terrel Bernard, and we got a chance to really see the young guy grow up, make a ton of plays, and have one of the best seasons that we've seen from him. I mean, arguably Pro Bowl caliber, all pro caliber, when you look at statistically what he was able to accomplish. Guys like Dorian Williams, who was a rookie last year, we got a chance to see him get out there and have some very valuable snaps. But then I also look at guys like Deion Jones, who we haven't had before. That type of guy coming into this equation as well. And I just say, man, you lean on those guys. You find reassurance and comfort in those guys, knowing that, man, two of these guys had to play a substantial amount of time last year. And this other guy in Deion has already had a ton of success in this league. We're just trying to see at this stage of his career, can he also maintain health? But you still feel a little bit more confidence in that group based on what had transpired a year ago. And we still had to see those guys step up and make plays. But as a whole, everybody is definitely feeling the ripple effect. And you know that you're going to have to step it up because one person doesn't replace Matt.
Yeah, and unfortunately, the Bills defense is kind of getting used to not having Matt Milano around. And that's very unfortunate. Does create opportunity, right, for other guys to step in. And you mentioned Dorian Williams, who figures to be a big part of that replacement plan. I think we can all agree Dorian Williams, fast, physical, good downhill player. Maybe the questions come from the coverage perspective. And we know that the Bills like to have these matchup linebackers that can play in space, run, carry tight ends into space. I mean, it's a tough job. And in particular, the zone coverage component. How does a player like that get better in zone coverage?
Yeah, when I look at Dorian, man, I felt like last year he made some really good plays, but at the same time, his mistakes, I looked at it and said, these are more young guy mistakes. The game is happening fast, but also your head is spinning week to week, especially later in the season when the game plans are as robust as they are then. We're talking about Sean McDermott also a year ago being the architect and the guy that was calling it, very different than what we're going to experience this year. So I felt like at times for Dorian, man, it's just you got to slow it down. And the way that happens is through reps. He had a lot of reps last year. He's had a full offseason this year. And I feel like for him, it will be a little bit more simplified, almost like when we saw Terrell. Think about last year was Terrell's second year, not his first year. And that was where you really saw this leap in production from him. So when I look at Dorian, I'm saying the same thing. Now you're going to get a chance to feel what that tight end is like running up the seam. You're going to get a chance to see what NFL play action is like in contrast to what you've experienced in college. Because everybody talks about that being the jump. When you get up here, it's like everybody is fast. Everything looks like it's going full speed. And it takes time to adjust to that. But I feel like for Dorian, man, as long as he can start to slow that down, and I feel like he's done a good job of that thus far in the preseason, I think we will see a better version of him specifically in coverage. I'm confident, though, that he can do the blitzing because we know with Terrell, man, that's the guy that we're going to lean on heavily to do, more of the coverage stuff right now.
Now, the linebacker that everyone's talking about is Joe Andreessen. And I know you got a chance to watch that game. Your two former teams, they're playing in the preseason after they play in the playoffs, right? So you've had all the Bills.
Every year I get this game, man. I'm like, are we doing the preseason? Is it the season opener? Or do I get a playoff game? I mean, either way, I know I'm going to get my treat right here.
Right. I'm sure that's a lot of fun to take in, but how about Joe Andreessen? I mean, just objectively played extremely well. I mean, you watch the game live, he's making plays, then you watch the tape and you realize that the instincts really pop, the physicality, playing through contact, it all really, really shines. And so how do you contextualize this? I think that's where people are wondering. This is a tryout player that gets an UDFA contract, that gets this opportunity, and everybody's talking about it, even on a national level. How do you contextualize this type of performance, and what should our outlook be for Joe Andreessen moving forward?
Yeah, for me, man, I'm loving everything I'm seeing from Joe. First off, he's the local UB product. So whenever you talk about having that connection and then being able to play for the hometown team, I mean, it's an awesome storyline. But then when you actually cut on the tape and watch this guy, he's productive. He produces. And I always say you can only control what you can control. And what do I mean is he didn't have any say on him not being drafted. He couldn't control him signing here as an undrafted guy. But what he can control is anytime he's had his number called, you see him come out here and make plays. And he's doing it at an NFL level, which is very impressive because we see time and time again, guys come out here in the preseason, and even if it's a play we all feel like this guy should make, they don't make it. So when I'm first seeing him do that consistently, that's a huge step in the right direction. Then you start to look at some of the people that he's doing it against, and that is the impressive part also. Now, in terms of how do I contextualize it, for me, I still look at it and say it's preseason. So it's a little bit of grading on a curve with Joe, but at the same time, as an undrafted guy, to come out here and to look as good as he's looked and look as productive as he's looked, along with us having this injury to Matt Milano, what's keeping Joe from pushing for an opportunity to have significant playing time this year? I feel like for him, if you go out here and you keep producing like this, who cares where you were drafted at? You can't keep production off the field like that.
And I'm sure he'll get a great opportunity against Carolina on Saturday to get a bunch of run. Yeah. And he doubles down. It's gonna be fun to talk about that.
I mean, think about it, Joe. How would you play it, man? If he comes out here and has another performance like how he just did, you can't just keep sitting down like, man.
Well, I think the conversation is already shifted from, okay, practice squad versus 53. And certainly with some of the linebacker injuries that the Bills have had, not just to Matt Milano, coupled with how Joe performed, it feels like there's probably going to be a spot for him.
Absolutely. And special teams is also going to be huge for him early on. And I feel like, man, he's a guy that should definitely be able to produce on that just based off of what we're seeing from him on defense right now.
Yeah, that I was so impressed with his ability to just get off contact. I'm watching him put James Daniels and Isaac Seumalo, good guards.
Good, I'm about to say good players, man. Absolutely.
Playing off the whole, tackling Justin Fields and Cordero Patterson in space. That's going to be a big deal. We're going to talk about the kickoff rule later on, but I'm sure those types of skills are going to be very useful on that new kickoff coverage.
Oh, 100%. 100%.
Folks, the NFL season is here, and I know you want to get to Highmark Stadium to watch the Bills play, or maybe you want to get to a road game. Well, if you do, you got to download Game Time. Game Time is the fast and easy way to purchase tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. The app is awesome. It's easy to navigate. They have flash deals. They give you last-minute ticket specials. They give you a seat view. And my favorite thing is that you can turn on the all-in pricing and see the full price from the beginning of the purchase. So that way there's no surprise fees coming at the end of the purchase. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL. That's LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Now, a player I'm excited to ask you about is Von Miller. I think we're all kind of struggling on calibrating our expectations for him. Certainly know the career, but coming off of an ACL, last year wasn't his best, and I think we're hopeful that 2 years removed, he can play a lot better, but he's also 35 years old. And how do you approach this? What are you looking for out of Von Miller this year?
Man, Von is a very unique person. Like we said, when we first think of Von Miller, my mind instantly goes back to 100 career sacks, Super Bowl MVP, him destroying Cam Newton in the Super Bowl, when he was in Denver. But at the same time, we also know that he's been banged up a little bit. He hasn't, gotten back to that per se in the past couple of seasons. So it is this weird mix of, does he still have it or is he still elite? I don't think that he's still in the elite conversation, but what I do feel like is in the right situation, he can be dominant. And what I'm saying is, don't have him trying to be Batman the whole time. I feel like you have to lean on guys like Gregory Rousseau, AJ Epinesa. I feel like you lean on those guys, and now we're deploying Von a little bit more intentionally, but you're allowing him to have his best 20 reps in the game versus him playing 60 snaps. And we're trying to figure out when we're going to get those good 20, but they're so washed in between all these other plays. That's kind of how I'm looking at Von at this stage. And in the NFL, that's kind of the circle of life. You play till you start getting to that elder statesman, and now you become more of a specialty weapon. But what his weapon is being able to get after the passer. And because of how fundamentally sound he is at rushing the passer, that's a big reason why his game has been able to age as good as it's been. This isn't a guy that, typically doesn't have sacks in a season. That was a one-off. That was an outlier a year ago. Typically, this guy's going to be able to get home and generate good pressure. So for me, I just say less is more with Von right now.
Well, and I think the Bills probably learned a good lesson last year working with a player like Leonard Floyd. Floyd
absolutely.
comes over. It's a career high 10.5 sacks, but by far the fewest amount of snaps he's played. I mean, literally like 400 snaps less than he's played in each of the last 5 years. And so I think that kind of lines with what you're talking about is less is more. Get him on the field less, but you don't need him on the field 1st and 10 from the other 20-yard line.
This is right? Von Miller we're talking about.
Yeah.
When it's time to drop back and throw the ball, put him on the field then. We don't need him to be out here playing the run every single down. We got other fresher, younger bodies that can do that. And I think that that's one of the things that if you're, Coach McDermott, you're definitely having those conversations right now.
One of the players that I was most excited to ask you about is rookie edge rusher Javon Solomon, because I think there's probably some parallels here, Arthur, to yourself, right? You guys are both big-time productive college pass rushers. Not necessarily all the measurables, get drafted a little bit later, and you went on to have one heck of a career for yourself. What do you see out of Javon Solomon?
Listen, man, I love Javon Solomon, man. When we saw he was getting drafted, I went, cut on his tape, and I'm like, yo, I love the fact that he's an undersized, very explosive pass rusher, but he also plays the run really well, very fundamentally sound with his hands. And that's the thing that I feel like has been a big reason why he's been able to transition up to this level and still be as productive. We know he's athletically gifted in terms of his first step. You watch him get off the ball, his get off is nice, but you also look at just the skills that are coming with it. He's not just winning because he's running around guys. No, he's putting together multiple moves. He's setting up what he's trying to get accomplished. And I thought it was on perfect display versus Broderick Jones for the Pittsburgh Steelers, who's a first rounder from a year ago. Javon made plays on him, and it had everybody in terms of Pittsburgh fans looking like, whoa, what's going on here? That's the type of thing that keeps you on the field. That's the type of thing that gets you in the rotation as an edge rusher. And for me, I just feel like for Javon, you got to look at the position group and say, it's not, a ton of established that's going to keep me from being able to carve out a role as an edge rusher. Outside of Von, there's not this robust group of double-digit sack guys on the outside just yet. So for him, if he can prove that he can consistently win like he was doing last week, I think that he could definitely get a chance to be a part of that rotation come the regular season.
Would like to get some thoughts from you on that transition for him. I know that every college player has a transition to the NFL, but like very specifically coming from Troy and you came from James Madison, how much different was the techniques and strategies that you needed to develop to beat NFL offensive tackles compared to the guys you're going up against in college?
Yeah, there are a lot of things that you start to add to your repertoire of rush moves or just your overall plan as you approach the game. And the big thing that I know for my adjustment, and I'm sure for Javon is something similar, is the size of the tackles. It wasn't that we hadn't faced 300-pound offensive linemen. Yeah, you faced that. But when you talk about at Troy or at JMU, that tackle might be 6'3", 6'5" is like really, really big. You get to the NFL and 6'5" is the little tackle. 6'7" is the big tackle. You think about a Deion Dawkins. It's like, man, that type of guy, you're not doing the same move that you would do on a 6'3" tackle versus him. His arms are too long. He's too big of an athlete. So there are things that you just start to understand. And at the same time, you look at what you bring to the table. And for Javon, that speed that he plays with is dangerous. It makes offensive linemen uncomfortable. And that was one of the reasons that I was able to have success. The speed part. So you just have to figure out that, and then you put together the plan that works best for you. And sometimes, man, it's going to be as simple as, I just got to make sure he doesn't touch me. Other times it is going to be like what we saw last week, where it's, let me use my speed and convert this to power. And now I can surprise this big guy and get him off of balance. So I feel like for Javon, he's already putting together rush plans, and we're seeing him have success in stadium. So I just think for him, he has to just consistently stay in that part of it, you know, in terms of the details, the little fundamentals of that. And I think for him, man, he'll be able to transition really smoothly to this level.
I have to sneak one in here about Ben Denucci because I mean JMU, right? I mean, come on now.
Let's go.
I got to know this guy could be the backup quarterback for the Bills.
Fresh
right?
off the golf course, man. I love it.
What's up? What do we need to know about Denucci? What's the skill set here?
Man, so Denucci's a proven winner. When he was at JMU, he had transferred in from Pitt, and when he came in, it wasn't that it was going to be given to him. He had to compete for it. But once he earned that spot, this was a guy that showed up every single week and was the clear-cut leader of this offense. Man, he could use his legs if he needed to, but he also had really good pinpoint accuracy. I thought he specialized in that short to intermediate game. More of that with the accuracy versus the big arm like the Josh Allen, you know, throwing it 60, 70 yards against the wind. Like, that's not his game, but he's going to accuracy you to death. And he's definitely a guy that is very fleet-footed, or I would say underrated with his speed, man. But he definitely is going to be able to use some of that. But this is also a dude that we saw have success when he was in Dallas for a little while. Bad situation, go start, and he found a way to get up out of a stadium with the victory, man. And then we know that he still was playing football a year ago in the XFL. So that was the other part that I did like about him being picked up. It's not that he was just sitting around since that Dallas Cowboys opportunity and hadn't played any ball. He's been playing. It's just you get a chance to go out here versus, you know, the best of the best.
I want to ask you about one more player in particular and then some big picture thoughts on the Bills defense. But Greg Rousseau, a lot of hope for him. You're thinking, listen, for me, Arthur, everybody's got a lot of thoughts on maybe why the Bills have stalled out in the playoffs. I think it's 100% clutch pass rush. Like in those big critical moments against Mahomes and Burrow, I don't think the pass rush has been there. And it feels like the guy that can provide that is Greg Rousseau. And I think before he had the foot injury last year, the dude was off to a phenomenal start.
He was having a great year. Yes.
Can he have the Ed Oliver breakthrough this year? Like, what are you looking for him in year 4?
Man, that's a heck of a comparison when you bring up the Ed Oliver breakthrough, because remember, prior to him getting that contract, everybody thought that was the craziest thing at the time, but he found a way to actually produce and live up to it. And I was really impressed with him because of that. Man, with Groot, man, he has all the talent in the world. This has been the case the past couple of years for him. I love his athletic profile, the length that he has, the speed that he's able to play with, along with the power. I look at him and I say, why haven't you produced in the same way that we've seen a Jalen Phillips in Miami produce? Because you're just as talented. I personally think that you have a little bit more juice because of your athleticism. When I watch him on tape, I just think that for him, he has to lock in on it being a every play thing. And once you get to that, and sometimes, man, we don't know when that switch is all the way going to flip. I felt like last year, prior to him having the foot situation, I feel like it was flipping for him because you were seeing the production as a pass rusher. When he's coming out there and his mindset is, you cannot block me. That has to be his mindset. And I felt like that's been it this preseason, especially when you watched him against the Pittsburgh Steelers. He looked like he just didn't care who was going to be in front of him. His mindset was, you can't block me. That's the same mindset that Von Miller shows up with. That's the same mindset that all the elite guys had. And Greg is just as talented. He should have that exact same mindset. So I feel like for him, if he can stay healthy and truly just do this every single play, have that mindset, I don't see why he won't have double-digit sacks this season, because he has every type of gift that will promote that.
You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Well, we have a little something different for you. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel at any time. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to download America's #1 sportsbook. All right, I want to get into some big picture conversation with the Bills defense. We've gotten specific on some players I really wanted to kind of pick your brain on, but now just generally speaking, when you think Bills defense 2024, Bobby Babich taking over as a defensive coordinator, certainly some transition, right, in the secondary in particular.
Yeah, absolutely.
What gets you most excited about this defense and what it can be this year?
Honestly, it's the box, the front seven. I love it, man. When you're talking about Terrel Bernard, I love the way that he showed up last year. I love the production I saw from him. When you talk Ed Oliver, DaQuan Jones, I feel like those guys are ready to continue terrorizing the AFC East. We saw Ed really take a major step forward, and I feel like for him, there's still more production that we can be getting out of him. I think he's that talented of a player. I look at those guys in the front, Groot as well, and I'm like, man, you still could be a lot better. So I'm really excited because I think that they have a lot more potential and they were already a good group. So for me, I'm just eager to see, can they actually be the leaders of this defense and be the wave that we're going to have to ride, so to speak.
All right. Well, I like that answer because I'm a big trench guy, defensive front. So if that's what gets you excited, that gets me excited.
I mean, did you see some of these draft picks? I know you've seen Dwayne Carter, right? Have you seen Dwayne? Dwayne looks good, man.
It's the run defense for Dwayne that I didn't expect to be so solid, in particular against the Bears. I thought he did such a good job. And the thing that I was excited about with him is the pass rush. But I do think that speaks to the depth overall, even in Austin Johnson as a backup to Daquan Jones. I like. We didn't even get to Epinesa, who I think is playing his best football of his career.
And think about it now. How long has he been in the system? It took him a little while for him to finally get, built in and be more consistent. But now here he is. And this is what we're going to need him. When we're talking about this front, we're talking about how do I maximize Von Miller? AJ, I need more consistency. Greg, I need the consistency from you guys. And I think that they're ready, man.
I'd love to hear you expand on that a little bit more. Year 5 in the system, because Arthur, unfortunately, 4 years in Buffalo, 3 different defensive coordinators. You were there, brother, but you weren't settling into any system. I mean, how advantageous is that for a player to have that type of coaching stability in terms of scheme?
It is a major boost. That was one of the big things that I enjoyed about when I came to Pittsburgh. Playing here with Coach Tomlin, it was like, you have the same coach every year, same defense every year. So you get to play so much faster because you have a familiarity with it. You understand all the nuance, all the little checks, the little minutia that might come into an alignment. So for AJ, he might understand now when we're calling this blitz, it's going to show here, but I'm actually the guy that this is set up for. Or when we have this coverage, I know, man, this ball is going to come out fast. Or, hey, this is the time where I can go ahead and know that he has to hold this ball. We're 8 dropping. So I'm going to have a lot more time to rush here. You get to have that big understanding when you're in the same scheme, the same coach, and the same messaging, because we know, obviously, Leslie Frazier was the DC at one point. Sean McDermott took over play calling, and now you have Bobby. But all of them are under the same umbrella of Sean McDermott. So the messaging is concise, is consistent. And I think that those are big reasons why guys like AJ can feel a lot more comfortable and can play faster. I don't think that Ed Oliver having the jump that he had last year was any surprise from that either. When you're having that ability to stay within the same scheme, and now you're getting more and more understanding, along with them also turning to guys like Ed last year and saying, we're going to be dependent on you to produce more in these spots. When we don't want to blitz, we need you to win up front. That's the same type of conversation they're going to have with AJ when we're saying we need you to be a guy that can stop the run so we can stay in nickel and keep tearing on the field. Because we know we love to have nickel out there instead of playing base, but we can't do that unless we got a front 4 that can smash the run. And I feel like AJ is one of those guys that brings that to the table, and that's why I'm excited to see him do it this year.
I feel like I would be remiss if I didn't ask you a question about Mike Tomlin, because I mean, what an unbelievable career. The consistency is off the charts. And my exposures to Mike Tomlin come from the Senior Bowl. I get a chance to go most years to the Senior Bowl, and I get to go on the sideline during practices. And Mike Tomlin's in the weeds, right? Yes. Like, this guy's been coaching for a long, long time, right? Is proven of a coach as there is in the NFL. And this guy is out there on the sideline just talking to players, coaching them up, like in ways there's no other NFL head coaches out there doing that. Like, what's the deal with Mike Tomlin? Like, what do we need to know about this guy?
Man, Coach Tomlin, he is one of those guys that he just understands how to connect with his players. He is very authentic. He is very real. And when he communicates from that space. And I think that that's why if you don't understand it, you'll misread it as he's a player's coach or he's just too friendly. But in all seriousness, it's more so he just understands how to connect to a guy's heart. And that generates just the utmost respect for him. So you don't have to always yell and, walk around like an intimidator. It's more so, man, there's a mutual respect, but you understand what I am bringing to the table, and he understands how to motivate you. And that was one of the things that I've always, enjoyed about him since, playing for him in 2014. Just his ability to, it didn't matter if it was Ben Roethlisberger, Antonio Brown, or me. He could come in, he'll be able to speak to all of us in our own way, and he would have his own way of saying certain things that it just stuck with you. And I mean, it's things that he told me back then that to this day now, I still implement a part of my daily life because of the parallels and because of how impactful it was for me.
I appreciate you sharing that, Arthur. Let me ask you one more question about the defense, and I want to get a special teams question in. We talked about what gets you excited about the Bills defense. Where do you maybe find some concerns with how this
don't do
look
me like
in
that.
2020? Come on, we got to be honest about it.
All right. I'm a little nervous about our secondary, specifically the safeties. Whenever you're going from Jordan Poyer, Micah Hyde, let's be real. That's going to be an adjustment period. Those are all pro caliber guys, and we had them for so long together, playing at such a high level for so long. It really, changes the centerpiece of this defense, because those were the guys that never left the field unless they were hurt, obviously. But you talk about the leadership, you talk about the playmaking ability, and how those guys could work together so well, and it would help with disguising certain things. Now we're going through a little bit of a transition, whether it's Cole Bishop, who we know as a rookie, but he's also banged up. So there are certain questions that we're going to have in terms of his development and how soon he will be ready to be a full-time starter. We think about Taylor Rapp. We love the fact that he came over, bringing some championship pedigree, but he's going to have a very expanded role also with bigger expectations now because of those other two safeties that I mentioned being gone. DeMar, we're excited to see what he can do. Obviously, we know that last year he was really working himself back into it. So it's going to be interesting to see, can he push to potentially be one of those guys in the rotation out there? But that's the big part that makes me uneasy. I feel like outside that corner, man, Rasul Douglas came in and played out of his mind last year. I mean, we went from, can he do it, to, he might be our best guy in the secondary the way that he was playing. We know with Christian, man, he's one of those guys that I always say, he doesn't win the style points, but he is super productive. He is always going to do everything that you need from him, and he's very technically sound, and that's the thing that I like. That's a big reason why he's been able to have the success that he's had. The dark horse for me is Khair. I'm like, man, last year, late in the year, postseason, started to make plays. Good preseason thus far, but that's another one of those guys that I'm just like, I want to have some reassurance that I know that you can be this guy, because we're accustomed to Trey White. But unfortunately, those days are gone now. So I don't get to just sit back and say, well, I know I got the all-pro at that spot. I got all-pro back here. Yeah, we're good on the secondary. So until I see those new characters fully emerge, that's going to make me feel a little uneasy right now.
Totally understandable. I think if there's a place to find comfort in that, it is Coach McDermott's resume with defensive backs, right? Corners and safeties throughout his entire career, just whether they're top picks or later picks or guys that have been overlooked throughout their careers. It feels like he just gets the most out of these guys. So hopefully that continues. I want to ask you about the special team stuff here. You, of course, multi-phase special teams player throughout your career.
Special teams matter. Yes.
They sure. If anybody that listens to this podcast, we talk special teams all the time. We're talking holders, punters, all of it, all the time.
Everybody matters in that. Yes.
So what's your take on this new dynamic kickoff rule? I've said that this is the most significant rule change in my lifetime that has come through in the NFL. Do you think there's going to be a big adjustment for players, or is it the same stuff? It's blocking, tackling, leverage. What's the adjustment going to be like, and do you like the rule?
Man, so when we first talk about the fundamentals of the play, yes, we can, minimize it to, just block, release, engage, find the ball. And then if you're, on the return side, try to take a charge, right? Slide your feet, get in front of this guy, and now hopefully the returner has enough space. Those are the basic fundamentals of it, but I feel like it's drastically different because of the alignments now. In the past, I know when I was playing, it was very different when you're talking about, the flying kickoff where you could actually get a running head start 10 yards before you took off. And then it was 3-man wedges and all those things. Yeah. That was very different. Then we know, just this past year where it's been like how it's been the past 2 to 3 seasons where it's a stationary start, ball, go. And now we kind of react to it that way. I just think that guys that play linebacker, guys that are used to hat hands and shedding blocks, I think that they should thrive on coverage in these situations, man, because of the lack of running start. It's going to happen so much faster. I think it's going to be a challenge also to sustain your blocks, man, because you're just trying to figure out these different body types. And with the amount of space that there's going to be between those guys blocking and where they're allowed to catch this football and them not being able to run until the catch, I just think that you have a chance for some excitement, which obviously that's what the NFL wanted. And I get them wanting to minimize some of those big collisions. And I think they've done that. I just feel like optically, though, it is such a drastic change that's why we all have this weird feeling about it. As much as I wanted to work out and be successful, in the back of my mind, the football purist and snob, I'm like, no, I hope it fails so we can go back to what we're accustomed to, man. But I get the intent behind the rule. So I will give it a go, and I hope that it surprises me.
Well, I think we're going to see more returns. And if that's what the NFL wants, we'll see that. And certainly it's a lot less of an open field play. There's a lot less air, right, in the play. Yeah. So we'll see how it all goes. Hopefully it's safe and everyone enjoys it. But I think that's where the teams that voted against it wasn't that they were against change. It just felt so drastic, so quick. Yes. There's no trial period. It's like, here it is. And you just wonder, I mean, we got a season to play. We got to crown a champion at the end of this thing. And Joe, you hope that there's not any unintended consequences, right?
And Joe, on top of that, when we think of where the rule or the change was inspired, it was from the XFL. And they abandoned it after a year. So that was the part where I'm like, all right, XFL, I get why, you guys kind of try certain rules out for the NFL. But if this is such a successful thing and it makes the most sense, why have you abandoned it? Why have you flipped back to the traditional kickoff? And now we're doing what you guys were doing. That was the part for me that I just had a hard time grasping.
Well, we're all going to have to be fluid and deal with it in stride. At least you're not a special teams coach right now. Could you imagine?
Very true. Oh, man.
Trying to figure this thing out week to week.
Listen, they're talking about who should kick the ball. How do you get into the landing zone? Like, I'm just like, yeah, times have changed, man. Y'all gonna earn your checks this time.
They sure have. Well, hey, maybe it provides more opportunity for guys. If special teams become even more important, I think that's maybe more opportunity out there for players. So maybe that's a silver lining in all of this.
Yeah, absolutely.
Arthur, this has been so much fun. Thank you for giving me some of your time and for giving Bills Mafia some of your time to hear from you on these topics. And I know that this isn't the only opportunity. You have other things going on. Would you love to take an opportunity here to kind of share your own work?
Yeah, man. Well, Joe, it's always a pleasure, man. Anytime I get a chance to get up here with you, man, and talk some Bills. I mean, that's the heart. That's the passion. That's the team that helped me realize my NFL dream. So I will never forget that. But yeah, in terms of content, man, I'm on YouTube. In terms of content, I got a Bills channel and a Steelers channel. Obviously, those are my two teams. Arthur Moats 52 for the Bills. You already know, don't cross the Moats. And then Arthur Moats 55 for the Steelers fans that are out there. But, those are the big things that I'm doing right now from a content standpoint. And I love shoes as well for all my sneakerheads out there. Kicking it with Moats is my shoe channel as well. But yeah, we're heavy in the content space, man. And like I said, man, just enjoying the year, man. And looking forward to a great year from the Bills, baby. So let's go.
I've always enjoyed even watching you as a player. Felt like fan engagement was always really important to you. And I think
absolutely.
that Bills Mafia knows that. They, real recognizes real. So appreciate kind of the player that you were, but also, what you've done since your playing time to stay connected.
No, man, I appreciate you. And that's the other part, man. Bills Mafia makes it so easy. I mean, from the time I got drafted, man, they welcomed me in with nothing but open arms, and it's been love ever since. And like I said, for me, man, it's one of my favorite memories. It's one of my favorite places to visit because of that love, man. So like I said, man, always love the Bills.
All right, folks, a big thank you to Arthur Moats for joining me here on this episode. I really enjoyed having the opportunity to pick his brain and get his thoughts on the Bills defense entering this season. As always, I kindly ask that you share, subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. Have a great rest of your day. Go Bills, and I look forward to catching up with you again real soon.